Thank you for showing up. It's another Friday night here at UFO AZ Talks. I'm Ted Loman, and Jim and Peggy are hiding out there in the studio somewhere. They'll be with us a little bit later. We did the Phoenix Lights. Some say we've done it too much. People in this state, this town, in Phoenix, they want to move on, but I don't think you, the viewing public, has seen enough. You don't really know what's going on. We have the privilege of bringing in a lot of the people that are primary investigators, people that are involved in the analyzation of the videotape, and personal eyewitnesses. So you'll see that a little bit later in the show. This happened for all of you around March 13th, almost 9 months ago. And back with us after that time, I think it was they broke the news, they brought it to us, said, Ted, we need to get this on, we don't know what it is. Let's come on the show and take a look. With me tonight is Bill Hamilton and Tom King. Thanks a lot, guys, for being on the show. You were here last time. Give me a little, Bill, why don't you start off? You've been talking about it around. You were going to go to Brazil, you were in Italy.
Yes.
You seem to be a primary investigator along with Tom. You're writing a book. Tell me a little bit about what's going on in the 9 months period of time.
Well, Ted, since we had our initial sighting and since we found out that a lot of people had sightings that night, I have been contacted by several eyewitnesses, still am being contacted by eyewitnesses, as amazing as that may seem, 9 months later. Michael Tanner has also been contacted by eyewitnesses. We've been collaborating on collecting this information in one place. So we have equal copies of all the reports, all the drawings, the maps, whatever we need to do our analysis.
Was it bigger than what you guys originally thought it was?
It turned out that way. A lot of people were saying maybe 6, 7, 747s after the sighting. A couple of people had said maybe even it was a mile long, which at that time seemed like a far out estimate, but many witnesses have came forward since then saying that's a conservative number. Maybe 2, 3 miles is the largest it could have been, but at least a mile on some of these large objects.
Let me introduce you, Tom King and Bill Hamilton. Tom, you were the, we're going to see some of your footage a little bit later in the show. And Bill, you, your camera, the battery wasn't working, but I think that's excellent in a sense, because you had the opportunity not to put a camera to it, but put a binoculars or some kind of a spotting scope?
I looked through binoculars, and Tom had just purchased a terrestrial Celestron telescope. So I got to look at the telescope while he was videotaping. In fact, he was asking me what I was seeing through the telescope, and I described this to him. And I think it was highly significant because I probably had one of the closest views of those particular lights. We were at, of all the witnesses, we were the closest to the formation of lights, and then looking through this telescope under 24, 25 power brought me even closer. And I could see that we were looking at a perfectly round disc of light.
No smoke off of a flare, no parachute above it.
No smoke, no glare, no parachute above it, no aircraft in the area.
But
this was an intense kind, it looked like liquid gold. It was a beautiful, pure yellow color.
Excuse me, but what kept it hanging there? You made mention on, Tom, you made mention on one of your tapes, or somebody said that it looked like one was getting lower than the other one. Was that just visually, or was it actually happening?
I was trying to almost call the shots what I was seeing, because I could see it closer than some of the eyewitnesses behind me. And they were asking me if it was moving, what it looked like. And at one point, it seemed like it was moving, but I think it did move maybe a little bit behind some trees. That's why I think I lost it. I don't think the lights blinked out. I think it moved behind an object, like some palm trees is what I thought, and then they blinked out. But what's interesting after watching all these videos, these 5 videos shot near 10 o'clock, it turned out I had shot 5.5 minutes of tape and had got the whole sighting from start to end. Other witnesses also did this. They taped the whole sighting front to end, but theirs were only 2.5 minutes. or 3 minutes.
You know, that's kind of, because I've been looking at the tapes, you've provided me some video, and we'll provide the viewing audience here a little bit with it too. And thanks to Mike Tanner and Village Labs, which we'll be talking with a little bit later. But it seems like you, because I saw you guys' originally, these are really right there, and then you get some of the other footage where there's 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 lights that almost look like a V shape over the city. Now, are you saying that the same shot that you guys shot was the same shot that somebody else shot across town?
Out of the 5
at a different
videos,
angle?
some of the people seem to have shot over our head from behind us in Apache Junction. And what it turns out is the other lights were there. We couldn't see them. They were below the house line. Some of the ladies that were there said that I didn't get all of them on tape. Depending upon your vantage point, you could have seen 6 lights, 4 or 3, depending upon where you were at. But I think it was below the houses. I think some of the lights were under 2,000 feet. We couldn't see all of them because of all the trees and whatnot there.
Now, I don't want you to get mad and strangle me, but I have to ask this question. I took the tape and some of the other things, and I took it to a friend of mine that's in the service. And he happens to know exactly how to drop these flares, because at one time, or maybe he's still doing it, I don't recall at this time, but they drop these flares. And so he told me exactly how they drop them and the reason for it, and what, I think they're called Lutus or whatever. And so I didn't show him the video. The next time I popped in your footage, and because this was new, this was right when we were investigating this thing, trying to figure out what it was. And we popped it in, and immediately, boom, the first light came on, it was a flare. He said, it's a flare. He said, watch, count 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, and the next one lit. And I go, either this guy's seen this stuff or there's something there. But I wasn't sold with that for one reason, and this is the reason. I mean, he sat there and said, yes, that's boom, 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 and it seemed like it should be, but it also, I've seen flares shot before that they seem to do this. One will burn out and come down, one will go like this. They just weren't in a plane movement. But the thing that bothered me was that trailing light, Bill, is the first light that you picked up on your camera.
It's a double.
Was that a double?
That's the double.
It seemed like that, even in some of the other ones. I think there's the Moon Valley. It's way over here, and then the other ones are here. If they were flares in this should have burned out way before these other ones ever did. What did you guys come up with this other light
that came on first.
Yeah, that was first.
Right.
That's the first thing you picked up. What is that?
Well, to get more specific on the timing sequence, it's actually not 5 seconds. It's 8 seconds, 6 seconds, 8 seconds. On my video, Mike Christians, 8 seconds, 6 seconds, 10 seconds.
Are they identical?
No, they're not. There's small differences in that by 2 seconds. And when you get to some of the other videos where they got the whole thing, there's delays in there that last over 15 seconds. Now, what, did the A10 just stop in midair for 7 seconds before proceeding and dropping the next one? If you calculate it's going at a measurable speed and he's hitting the button every so many seconds, how come some of the spacing is so far apart but the time is short? It doesn't add up. What I'm saying is out of all these videos, you would expect to see that this third light on all these videos is on 2 minutes and the fourth one's on 3, but it's not like that. They're all different timings.
Okay.
Like 2 locations.
Did you guys ever have a chance to go in and say to the, because you're doing a thorough investigation and you're going to be coming out with a book in this. Did you go to the Air Force and say, let me talk to somebody, can you tell me what these things, what did they say?
In fact, I filed a Freedom of Information Act request with Davis Monthan Air Force Base, where allegedly the A-10s took off, okay? And the only information I had at the time was that the A-10s had returned from the Phoenix area, get this, from the Phoenix area, and landed at 8:30 p.m. that night. That's the only published information we had. The other published information was that the flares were jettisoned at an altitude of 6,000 feet. This is what was printed in the Arizona Republic and probably the Tribune, okay? Now get this. I've recently done a calculation. Couldn't do it before because we didn't know the exact location of where the alleged flares were dropped.
Right.
Okay. now that we know that it was out on the North Tack Range, they had to be not just jettisoned, but they had to ignite at 24,000 feet in order to clear the line of sight over the mountains that we had.
Is that what? Is that some
That's
kind?
4 times the height that the paper quoted. Okay, 24,000 feet in altitude. In other words, that's where the lights, the flares would have had to ignite. Another thing is the National Guard was very specific that these were magnesium flares that burned a bright white and had a tremendous glow surrounding them that could be seen for 150 miles. We did not see white lights. We did not see flares. We did not see this tremendous glow. There was no glow. The lights we saw illuminated nothing. And in fact, it was recessed into some structure.
I want these people to look at these with the video that we show too, to see exactly what you're talking about. You don't claim that you know what's behind those flares. You don't make any claim that this belongs to a ship from outer space.
I'm not making a claim as to what it is, but I am ruling out, and I think we have effectively ruled out, that these were flares on the test range. I think we have now proven through a various analysis by computer that these lights, I'll call them the mystery lights, okay, were arrayed in a formation in front of the Estrella Mountains. Now, you just heard Tom say that some of these were obscured by a house. Now, if you look at a daylight shot of this house and the chimney, you will see that this house could be, you can see the mountains right above the house.
We'll do that. We have about a couple of minutes right now. Why don't we go ahead and roll some of that if we have it ready for us, please. Go ahead, Nick.
I don't know if I'm calling them.
This is the beginning of it.
I need a chair.
I got another spotting spot somewhere here if somebody wants to look for that too. There's 2 side by side. This is slightly different.
There's another one. Oh, look. 1, 2. There's another one.
Wait, where?
There's another one, too.
Where? Oh, look at that.
There's another one.
No, we're just excited. We're not.
They keep coming.
Wait, I see. Whoa, look at them.
I got that one on video.
There's 4 of them. Look at the 3 of them all together.
I got the 3rd one popping.
There's one behind the chimney. One just flared up.
I got 4 of them. Major sighting here.
No, there's 5.
Oh!
Another one just showed up.
Whoa!
Maybe somebody's setting up lights.
No, those are in the sky.
20 seconds.
There's one behind the chimney. We need to go to papers.
I can't see how this works. How does this work?
Holy shit.
Shit.
No. They're lined up in a pattern, man. There's geometry behind this.
I can't even get them. I've never seen it. Look at that.
Man, this is...
Let's see. Oh, there's 3 of them all lined up.
No,
4, Bill.
one
Bill, over here, there's 4.
Look.
Yeah, I see.
Over the top right now. I don't know, but I got it on tape.
They just appeared. They just
Okay, I got them in the scope.
What does it look like, Bill?
What do they look like in that camera?
They look like...
I'm not coming back on that immediately.
It looks like there's 3 of them.
What do they look like? Is it like this sphere before?
Yeah, they're spears now.
Are they complete circles or cut
Yeah,
off?
they just transformed into circles right now, right as you were talking. Now they're not spears.
Well,
Hey, Stephen Greer missed out, didn't he, Bill?
you made a mention that I hope I'm up, but you made a mention that Stephen Greer missed out. We'll get to that in a minute. There seems to be, once you guys saw it, and the eyewitnesses started coming out more and more and more. Why don't you give them a number, Bill, or a website or something that the viewers can contact you with some information that they possibly might have that you haven't received, and you can...
Well, I would like them to contact me through email.
Okay.
At starmanbh@aol.com.
Starman?
Starman BH, which are my initials.
Right.
@AOL.com.
Okay, how about yourself?
They can get a hold of me at zalum@networks.net.
Say that.
It's via the internet. It's spelled XALIUM at netwrx.net.
Okay, those are for you guys that have any questions or something that you need to get in touch with either Bill or Tom. Flares last how long in your research? Once you light a flare, dropping?
Just over 5 minutes.
Over 5 minutes.
Maximum.
When was the first sighting?
The first sighting of this type of formation was at 7:30 p.m.
Where?
On March 13th over the Superstition Mountains, and the last sighting was at 2 a.m. the next morning, just west of Phoenix over the Buckeye Hill.
Okay, those are sightings. What do we have? Do we have any variants in videotape? Did somebody shoot something within an hour, or is this all within, all the videotape we have, all within the same period of time?
5 of the videos are at 10 o'clock. One of the other videos from that night was shot just before 8:30, which shows a V of lights going over the man's head, which were amber colored, similar to what we saw in a way.
What were the first sightings? Didn't it come into Peter Davenport from Nevada?
We thought that the first sighting was at about 5 minutes to 8 over Henderson, Nevada.
Yeah.
But now we have learned that there was an earlier sighting at 5:30 in the afternoon over the Crown King area of 3 of these large boomerang shapes.
Alrighty, well listen, we've got to leave. I've got to wrap this up. But what we're going to see is the rest of your footage coming in and out, and I want people to see the other light. And then we're going to go in. Stay with us, please, because Peggy Kane will be interviewing Michael Tanner and Jim Dilettoso in just a few minutes right after this. So thank you, and stay tuned. Thanks, guys, for being on there and doing this.
Good to be here.
I really appreciate it. Please.
Nope. This isn't first for
Let
me.
me get your mic.
I have
Come
similar
up on
video
Peg,
of
get
this
the
from
lights
other
changed
people.
out, please.
The way we were seeing them, when you see them big, they're big and they're moving and they have an eye to them.
You see an eye? Like a bullseye?
No.
Did you show them the tape already? Did you see the other tape? Yeah. See the eye? That was
This just looks like.
Out of focus here. We got major hockey puck activity.
Hey, why don't you have our videotape? Because
I don't have a tape in it.
I think the one on the left may split in half.
See, it's drifting down.
It seemed like the one on the right split there for a minute.
How many is there? I got 4.
if you saw 2, then they just started going.
No.
The other one faded away.
The other one went behind.
Behind a tree. I got 3 lined up.
Yeah.
Oh no, I forgot to hit the record button.
There's only 3 and they're going down now.
Have you hit it?
Yeah, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, but we need the video camera to put like you have on your hurry.
I need to get a videotape.
Anybody got a still camera, 35 millimeter? Hey, look, the one in the middle's doing something. It's going out of alignment.
Yeah, it's going out of alignment.
It's dropping.
Keep changing.
The one on the left, did it drop off?
No, the one in the middle is dropping slightly, and it's the one on the right's blinking. No, that's because it's going behind a tree now. They're definitely moving.
Wait, where'd the other one go?
No, one is went behind a tree or something. The one on the right will be gone in a minute as soon as it goes behind something.
Get up close. It's all clear. You can see all the way to the mountains.
Hi. In this second segment of the show, we're going to be talking to Michael Tanner and Jim Dilettoso on some of the analysis and also some of the eyewitnesses regarding this sighting, this major sighting of last March. Anybody who watches TV has probably seen Jim. He's very renowned for analyzing videotape and I know every time I turn on a program having to do with the UFOs, it seems that Jim Dilettoso's face is there. Jim has brought his computer, and he's going to talk a little bit about how these different videos are analyzed. And Michael, from our discussion before we came up, has gone out into the field, talked to many eyewitnesses, helped to gather this information, and so we're going to be discussing some of these aspects of this ongoing controversial phenomena. And I want to welcome you to the show.
Nice to be here.
Good to be here.
Good. Maybe we could just start with you, Michael. You said that you went out into the field. You would contact different witnesses, talk to them about what they've seen. What was it that you were doing?
Well, our objective initially was we thought to be able to recreate with our computer graphics a relatively simple flight path of a V formation of lights that went through the state from the northwest roughly to the southeast. Soon after the reports started rolling in, and Bill Hamilton in particular began to determine that there were multiple events, then it got more complicated, and my particular role was to, in this regard of recreation, to art direct that particular aspect and help Jim assemble the database, go to key witnesses with a view to establishing flight path information, and turned out to be multiple flight paths. And I worked with the witnesses and sketching with them with a view to really try to recreate what they saw.
Now, I asked you earlier if any of these people, because we keep hearing about the Phoenix lights, are they flares? And it seems that most of the attention is focused on a cluster of lights. But I asked you whether any of these people had had a daylight sighting or had seen whatever this was during the daylight hours. And you said that there were. That's correct. Fortunately, the national press, the USA Today article in particular, brought a lot of new witnesses forward, even from our own area. And one of them was a gentleman who called in and said that he was coming down I-17 with his family that afternoon late, about 5:30, and saw, he said, 3 of those Vs I saw in USA Today, Tim Lee's illustration. He said, we saw 3 of those hovering in a loose formation aiming west over the Crown King area. All of a sudden, a 4th object appeared first as an amber light, then it morphed into a diamond-shaped object or triangular, they weren't sure. Then we have 4 objects hovering of enormous size, they said. Then all of a sudden they stacked upon each other and then seemed to roll into a ball, and they disappeared. Within a second or two, 2 jets came at low altitude from the south, presumably from Luke, to investigate or attempt interception. Finding nothing there, they did a big loop and went back. That was the first event in Arizona that day. About how many events do you think really happened?
Well, Bill had identified our 4 main ones, and we were working in that scenario. And as more reports came in, as more reconciliation was needed in the differing reports, it became clear that were more events, more objects. So right now we're up to 15, and we think that several events may involve the same craft that came back later. But clearly a lot went on in a very short period of time. Really?
Jim, now you are the president of Village Labs, and I know, Michael, you're one of the directors. What is it that you do at Village Labs?
You mean our day job, real life?
No. Yeah, okay.
We design computer graphic systems. We've been doing it for a long time, over 20 years. And the graphic systems are for the entertainment business, special effects. We've done medical and mining projects. We've done, forgive me, government projects. That's okay. They're very good projects. We're not spies, you know. We design very high-quality gear. Frequently it's classified, but that means that we have access to very advanced tools. It also means that we can't always discuss or publish the techniques that we use. That's why we don't that often publish what we do. We're not a publishing organization, we're a lab. Whether we're designing computer graphics equipment for the movie Titanic, which is now coming out, and we were very instrumental, directly involved in designing the graphics rendering system, and flight simulators and image processing gear. That means that we know how to bring in experts and use tools, whether it's a large parallel machine or the appropriate software on a PC, and not do all the tests, but do a lot of the tests on each piece of equipment. So during the day, we have access to all these tools that we use at night to investigate claims of the paranormal. Doesn't mean that we're part of PsyCop, but claims of the paranoid are us. I say paranoid because a lot of people are paranoid in the area that we work in our day job, that we're actually trafficking paranormal things over into these projects. But as the Phoenix Lights project has unfolded, many of our clients want to know about that, in particular the testing that we did on lights unknown versus flares known, and what came out of that. And it doesn't matter to me what people say anymore about the techniques. We know that the techniques are correct that we use to test the pictures. It's amusing to me now that people will stand by the position that these are flares. I don't understand what they're trying to accomplish. I can't really devote much attention to that anymore. One position that we can take, though, is that in the analysis of the unknown lights versus the flares, the spectrum analysis is so drastically different that we don't even need to consider anymore whether or not these are flares. For example, this is the Mike Kristen video shot from the northern part of Phoenix, looking south-southwest, and this has been on television a lot. There's this row of lights in this, and what we're doing is across this single line here, we are analyzing the brightness and red, green, and blue frequency component of that unknown light, and we get this wave shape here. Now, the interesting thing about the wave shape is that all this is the noise in the background. You see there and there is here and here. And it's what you'd expect. It's flat, it's low down because it's near dark, and the lines are not even.
Right.
Red, green, and blue are out of phase. As soon as we get to this light, the red, green, and blue go in phase right on top of each other. In fact, all three graphs look like they're one graph. If we come over and look at the flares video, which was shot by Channel 12 in Phoenix, we will notice, let's bring up the flares graph. Here's one of the lights, that's the flares. And look at its characteristic graph. Let's move the two graphs beside each other so we can clearly look at them. True, this is shot on videotape, it has limited dynamic range, but we're comparing apples and apples. We have an unknown on videotape, we have flares, knowns on videotape, so we compare them within the domain that we have. These are fingerprints after a robbery. This is not like going into the police station where they say, dip your hands in the ink, we're going to get a perfect fingerprint. We have the limitations of this is what was left behind in a mystery moment on a doorknob. So we're comparing this unknown to the knowns of the flares, and you can see that the flare's signature print is so unlike that. It's very different that we're now interested in what kind of light could actually make this. In fact, in contacting one manufacturer of flares to have this man bid on making flares that would do this, he couldn't make them.
You know, we heard one of the theories about something called smart flares, which were a sort of a more sophisticated form of flares. But would it still be the same dynamic? I mean, these I think were computer programmed to behave in a way that was not typically flare-like. They were sort of able to move be programmed to move in a certain way.
Yes.
Would you still have the same analysis with something like that?
The way that a flare comes on and goes off would be another kind of graph, like looking at a drum. If a graph of a drum, you hit the drum, the graph comes on very suddenly, whereas a violin note comes on with a different kind of as they go on, even if they stay on with a smooth time graph, they still would tend to rise and fall, oscillate in brightness, and then sputter as they go out. When we look at these lights over time, because they're on for over 2 minutes, the way that they come on and the way that they go off is itself unique and totally uncharacteristic of flares. It's not that these lights are dying out or going off. The signature stays the same, it just gets darker. Whereas the flares, moment to moment, the graphs are all over the place.
Right, so they sort of are burning out.
Yes.
And these other lights were staying very steady.
Staying very steady with no corona around the light. In fact, mathematically, we have calculated that if these lights were indeed flares, 50 miles away, because we know from the videos that have been shot, the distance to given street lights. We know that a street light is 11 inches in diameter. We know how far it is. So we can then calculate that if these unknown lights were indeed flares 50 miles away, their diameter is over 600 feet.
Whoa.
Very impractical.
Yes, that would be pretty impractical. Well, can you hazard a guess as to what we were seeing or what was being seen that night?
Well, we are seeing something very unusual that doesn't match and classify with other lights that are in our database. What we do know is that the July issue of Scientific American ran a 10-page story about lights seen on the night of March 13th that were identified as unknown. We have these lights that are so clean, so precise, that they have no corona around them.
Glare.
These studio lights, we have the tungsten in the middle, or the quartz, then we have the glass housing around it, then we have a corona around that. 3 stages of properties of the light. These lights do not have a, quote, hot spot, a container, and a corona. They are very unique.
So they're just all completely the same. I mean, from edge to center?
That's correct. They're uniform.
Which
now,
is almost...
It's highly unusual.
Yeah,
there was some discussion that if you turned a video camera, because of the CCD chip or the tube that's inside, depending on what kind of camera, at a bright light, that it would saturate the white chip, the white balance in the camera would supersaturate it, and that's what we're looking at actually. Well, we did that test. There's been a lot of discussion on the net about that. We don't overlook these things. I may be short, but I'm not slow. So we studied these emails that were flying around about whether or not this was saturation from an extremely bright flare that was saturating the optics in the camera, and it would be a totally different characteristic wave. So we eliminated that. And now I'm back to comparing it to Lourdes, Fatima, biblical, paranormal, ghosts, other UFO sightings in Belgium and China and Russia.
So this is still an ongoing project.
It's one of the ongoing projects. In fact, it's a very interesting one because it's our own backyard.
Great. Well, we're getting ready to see a little video, and then we're going to go to talk to some of the eyewitnesses. Jim's going to be interviewing some eyewitnesses. Before we do that, we're going to be seeing our illustrious ex-governor, Fife Symington, and Councilwoman Frances Barwood in a little bit of what was going on after this event. I think you'll find it very interesting. We were hoping that we could have Frances here tonight, but she wasn't able to make it. So whenever you're ready, Nick, you can run that video for us.
So I'm going to order a full, investigation of this through DPS. An official announcement with no truth to it. The governor today calls for an investigation into these mysterious lights. Then he says it's all a big joke. The punchline, this bizarre news conference. But this joke has a serious side. And of course, many of you saw those lights.
They passed over the valley in March, but no one has given an official explanation as to what they were. So today, the governor announced he wanted to get to the bottom of things, but he didn't really want to know any details about those lights.
In the sky back in mid-March. Simonton called a news conference this afternoon saying he was going to ask the Department of Public Safety to investigate the lights. What's more, he said the DPS actually made an arrest in the case.
So this just goes to show that you guys are entirely too serious.
That's right, the whole thing was a practical joke. The governor's oath says he does believe in extraterrestrial life.
Told that I shouldn't go. And this was a friend of mine who happens to be in the news media. And she said, I'm calling you because I want you to know that if you go down there, that everybody's going to label you as some kind of a lunatic or a kook or, you know, and they're going to really attack you hard. And I said, well, I've kind of been attacked about as much as you can, and there's really not much more that they can say. So, you know, what are you going to do? And she said,
I'm on. Moving right along with the enigma of March 13th. We have with us Tim and Hal and Max. We have 3 eyewitnesses here that actually saw this incredible event. And Hal, we're going to start off with Hal because I think Hal saw it first here. Tell us a little bit about what you saw. And like we were talking earlier, there's so many lights, airplane lights, flying around Phoenix constantly, and at night especially. Why did you happen to notice this particular set of lights?
I noticed these lights because they're not normal, because a normal airplane light only has about 3, and they're very small, and they're really high up. These lights that I saw were very huge, like the size of the cap on a sewer, about that big, and it was only 100 feet up, so it's not like it was a billion miles up or something like that.
So it really stood out from normal aircraft lights that you would see that time. And this is about what time? About, you said around?
About 8:15, 8:30.
A little after 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
And
we weren't looking at watches, just, you know.
March, is it totally dark in March?
It's getting dark. Yeah, it's pretty dark.
A little twilight still in the sky?
What was happening at that time, the reason he saw the lights is we had pulled into the driveway facing west, and he was looking for the Hal Bopp comet, which appeared in the western horizon, and he was kind of looking more northwest, and he saw this little pattern of 5 lights. So when I came around to let him out of the car, he said, "Dad, look at those, what is that?" You know? So when I first saw it, I thought it was some kind of balloon with 5 lights on the top of it, but it wasn't.
Now this is extraordinary because this flew right over you.
Right.
I mean, you didn't just observe this as flares up,
but we saw it from many distances. You know, we saw it from the first distance was. I made this picture here.
Okay, just hold us real steady, and we'll let the camera catch up with you here.
You can barely see right here this little pattern of 5 lights. When we first saw it, it was kind of like in a half circle.
Now, is this a photograph of what you actually saw, or is this a rendering?
What this is this is a digital photograph from in front of my house that I took. After the sighting, everybody said, "What'd you see?" You know, and I didn't have a camera that night.
Okay.
So what I
So this is a recreation?
It's a recreation from, this is my cactus, and that's the roof of my house right there.
Okay.
So I made these images in my computer to try and explain to people what I saw. And we watched this thing in the half circle formation for probably, him and I watched it for a couple minutes, and then he ran in and got his mother because I wasn't explaining it, so he wanted to get an explanation. And then as we watched it, it turned, after about 5 minutes, it went from being like this. Then the next thing we noticed, it was in a V formation. So then for the next, say, 7 or 8 minutes coming towards us, it flew in this V. So we got to see these lights at many different distances. And I was mentioning to you before, when I first saw the Mike Critson video of the lights over Phoenix, it was like at a taping of strange universe, my wife and I both recognized the kind of the intensity of the light, the shape of the light, the distance between, the general context of the light as what we saw, except what we saw when we saw that, I thought it was a big, giant ship hanging over Phoenix with all these lights around the edge of it. That was my impression. Because we knew it wasn't flares, because like you said, this thing flew right over the house. What happened is it kept coming straight at us. We're up on the side of a hill, about 1,800 feet up.
You saw this, ultimately you saw this not as just lights, you saw it as a craft, you saw it as an actual physical object with lights attached to it.
Right. We saw the outline of the craft when it was about maybe a half a mile away.
Why don't you show us that?
Yeah. This one here.
This is extraordinary.
Yeah, this picture here is really, it's like a caricature of the craft, because I saw it from so many views, including directly overhead, that when I tried to draw it, it was so big, I didn't know how to fit it in the frame. So at one point, maybe when it was about a half a mile away, when we first saw that it was not just lights, it was lights set in some kind of structure, the way we saw that is it moved across the star field. We could see the outline shape of this dark shape.
Okay, you could see the stars disappearing.
Right, and it looked, my first impulse, it looked like a carpenter's square. It was so geometrical in shape, and the ends were squared off, the point was pointy, and the lights were perfectly symmetrically set into it. That, you know, I didn't have a clue what it was.
We were just hearing Jim Dilettoso explain the analysis of the character of this light is totally unusual. You were describing your impression and your wife's impression, your son's impression.
Yeah.
Looking at close range.
Right.
This thing was passing, like you said, over 100, within 100 feet of yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
What was the unusual quality of the light that you were seeing?
The light itself. The most unusual, when the last light on the one arm literally
you can show
passed,
us that picture too.
Yeah, it literally passed right over the house.
There.
It kind of, in a black and white, it looked like this. And what I remember was very clearly, absolutely clearly, how sharp the edges of the craft were. And this light, when I looked up inside the light, if it was 100 feet up, this light was about 6 or 7 feet across. And it looked like it bulged very, very slightly out of the edge of this substance, almost like if you took a glass of water and filled it up, this surface tension of the water, it looked like that. So it was not rounded bulge, it was flat bulged. And it looked like the light was made out of almost like a luminous fluorescent light without any glass over it. So it almost was like looking at a super white gas.
So did it have a flare like these lights did?
No. See, now my wife, she wears contact lenses, hard contacts, since she's a young girl. So any light that's bright, when she looks at it, she gets all these refractions. And she could see it when it was way off, that it was 5 separate lights without any kind of refraction. And when it went over, we could look directly up inside of this. It was like a white light well of some kind. And both of us talked about it. When we remember that, if we close our eyes and remember it, we become very peaceful feeling, thinking, you know, remembering the light, because it was just absolutely the purest, most beautiful white light, you know, I've ever seen.
Also, you said as the craft passed over, you're noticing that there was like an effect of the star field behind it?
Yeah, no, actually, and you couldn't see the stars through the arms, but this is kind of like, it was that big when it passed over. When you looked up in this part, in between the arms of the thing, like in here, the stars looked like you were looking through a mirage on the highway. They were kind of wavery or maybe thick glass, and we had the absolute impression that what we were seeing was just a very small part of whatever was up there. When this thing passed over, I really didn't see metal. It was just like black, no color. You know, it was like a shadow, a sharp-edged shadow.
How fast would you say this craft was passing overhead?
Well, I thought it was going 30 miles an hour or less, and I didn't see how it could stay up there.
For a craft
the kids thought it was doing about 10 or 15 miles an hour, because they chased it out in the street, and it was going so slow as it went through the rest of the neighborhood through Hatcher Pass. And this is what this picture right here. It was going so slow that the kids wanted me to get in the car and race it over to Hatcher Pass. See, this was going towards this big pass here.
And what part of Phoenix are we talking about here?
I'm up on Cave Creek, above Cave Creek Road on Mountain View, and like this little mountain community up there. I think it's about 1,600 or 1,800 feet up.
This is North Phoenix.
North Phoenix, yeah, North Central Phoenix.
Right.
So the most important thing was that it didn't make a sound. Like when it started going over, we all said,
to hear that?
Yeah, and the kids at first when it was coming over, they were doing this jumping up and down, and they were saying, oh, Independence Day, and they started backing up towards the house. Like I thought they were going to freak out and run into the house, you know. But then as it was passing over, it wasn't doing anything. They stopped that, and then they ran out in the middle of the street. And they're the ones that pointed out that up in between there, it was real wavy. They said, Dad, look upside in there, you know, it's really strange. And when it went over, I looked at the edge of it in comparison to the stars, and it reminded me of how a train goes by in a subway where you could look at the tiles behind the top of the chain, and it just goes like that. This thing went past the stars so evenly, there was no way it was affected at all by any kind of air current or anything. It didn't bounce or flutter. It was totally unbelievable.
Hal, what did you feel when you're seeing this?
Well,
Were you
when I
scared?
saw it, I was really scared.
Right.
I mean, if my hairs on my back started to go up because it was so tremendous, it made me feel like Independence Day because Independence Day really freaked me out.
What do you think you saw? You think it was from outer space?
Probably, or just people from the future or something.
Interesting. Max, do you have a microphone?
No.
Hal, if we just, I'll let you share that with Max.
Thank you.
Max, thanks for joining us. And does this sound like what you saw?
I live in northeast Phoenix, which is higher up than I believe where you come from. And at 8:30 in the evening, my wife and I were traveling north up through the desert, and cars were pulling off the road. Something was happening. In the northwestern sky, there was this incredible formation of V lights, and there were airplanes flying over it. So this was very low, maybe 1,000 feet. It came over our heads. It blocked out the stars. The thing that we saw was similar to that, but wasn't the same. It was a huge black triangle. There were no propellers, there were no jet engines, there was no noise, it was completely silent. And very gracefully, it glided across the sky heading towards Tempe, which is southeast Phoenix.
Definitely glided, that's a good word.
The most surprising thing about the ship was its size. It was definitely over a mile from its tip to tip at its widest point, well over a mile. It was huge, huge. My wife's a talker. She didn't talk for 15 minutes.
What what's your feel? Did you have any just gut feeling?
Well, you know,
what do you
I
think
did.
you were seeing?
Because when it was going over, I made a point. I was with my wife and I were hugging each other, believe me. And I didn't have a camera, so I really made a point of opening myself up to what I was looking at and not thinking about anything else. And you know, I more or less recorded this as it went over. And my net feeling as it finished passing over and it was heading towards the pass, I turned to my wife and spontaneously I said, whoever's got this technology is in cahoots with God. And I meant that, I mean that, because this thing, there's no one on this planet that knows how to do that, because otherwise, why would they put a roller skate on Mars and spend all that money if they could do this?
Good point. Brenda, how are we doing on time? 7 minutes. Okay, this happened back in March. You're all pretty much aware of the ramifications and how the media has responded to this. What are your feelings about, you know, the feedback that we've all gotten from this since March? You think, why the cover-up? Do you think there's a cover-up underway here? Do you think that the flares issue is to divert attention to this?
You know, I don't subscribe to that kind of thinking because it just screws your head up. You know, all that paranoia. That may be happening. You know, I don't know about that. I just know what happened and what passed over my house and what my experience inside of my mind was as to what I was seeing. And my experience that night was that the craft was definitely manufactured by, or created by, I felt confident that it was human beings. So somehow what I felt was that human beings were passing over my house in a craft that was not from our present day society and on this planet. So there's one conclusion, there's two conclusions. Either it's from another planet, it obviously has capabilities of flying extraterrestrial, or he was saying he thought it might have been people from the future. So it's human beings, and they're either from the future or they're from another planet, but they're certainly not from this planet.
Max.
Well, when you hear Frances Emma Barwood, who talks about having death threats and the threat to her career and the contempt the government clearly has towards the people of Phoenix to continually change the story time and time and time again as though the people here are fools. We're not fools. We know what we saw, and we'd like an explanation. It was quite extraordinary.
Can I say something?
Sure.
You know, I had, up until this point, I was not a UFO fanatic. I've known Jimmy Dilettoso for a number of years, but from his other business, you know, not from the UFO thing. And I was always a polite skeptic. I would never call anybody a liar, and I just didn't know what was going on. But now, when I've seen this thing, you know, I'm absolutely convinced that the government is in no way, shape, or form coordinated enough or intelligent enough to launch such a device, because and do a cover-up or any kind of explanation that people are trying to make about this from our viewpoint, an earthly viewpoint, to me is a waste of hot air. I think that the people should ask witnesses like myself and the others not only what they saw, but what went on inside of their minds. What did they feel about this thing? Because that's where the answer lies.
Do you feel like your life has been changed?
Absolutely.
Since this?
Because, you know, before this, I have other feelings and beliefs about God and things like that now I feel even more strongly about since this craft went over. Because I was telling you before, I had a really unbelievable experience because this craft came back. Now, not everybody knows this, but on June 25th, it flew over my neighborhood again, very high up in the sky, and I actually got 5 photographs of it. And the way that came about was very strange. On Friday, the 20th of June, after that article came out in the paper and they had us on Good Morning America and all these other shows, him and I were shopping, and I picked up this newspaper, the Sun paper, and it was talking about prophecies that Pope John the 23rd had back in the 60s, that in 1999, visitors from outer space were going to descend and do this stuff. So I thought about what I said about being in cahoots with God. I bought the paper, and that Sunday at Mass, after communion, I found myself thinking about that. And
you're showing a picture of the second object that you saw in June, correct?
No, this is from July.
This is July.
Yeah,
okay.
this is,
all right.
I was getting you ready for that, because this is how I know that these are not government people. Because what happened was at Mass, and this is really the truth, I actually said a prayer. I said, God, if these people are friends of yours, would you have them fly over my house so I could take a picture, because I didn't have film in my camera that night. So the following Wednesday, June 25th, I was sitting out on my back porch, facing west, looking towards North Mountain, and I was reading in the Bible, and I happened to be reading about Elijah. And he was in a craft lifted by light, and about he's coming back and all this other kind of stuff. And I started thinking about these people, how they now knew where I lived, because I was on TV. They know I saw them, because this is what I saw. And so I started having a feeling like they knew me. Not only that way, but if they were friends with God, that they knew me through God. And just then I had this feeling to look up, and I looked up, and up in the sky, heading from the west to the east, looked like a mirror flashing way high up. So I stood up and looked at it, and I realized that this was them. So I ran inside, got the camera, and my wife hadn't gone to work yet. She brought binoculars out, looked up at this thing. And then when I got there, it stopped this direction and it started going from the south to the north. And I took the 5 pictures. They're very hard to see. But what I saw was this craft here, and it had a huge sphere in the middle. So it was a craft with a sphere, and both my wife and I, she saw it through the binoculars, I saw it. I knew then that these were not government operatives. This picture here came about on July 23rd, about 8:25. I was in my backyard sitting outside, dark out in July, and I was talking to my son-in-law and my other grandson about the June 25th thing, and I was speculating on if they are human beings, where the heck do they come from? So years ago when I was a young guy, I had written a story for school, and it was basically, I started telling him the story, and what the story would say was, these people came from here.
I'm going to have to stop you right there and wrap this up. Just a real quick question for Hal. Hal, if you get your mic. If you see them again, do you think you'll feel fear again?
Probably not.
Very good. Did you look forward to it?
Yeah.
Cool. All right.
Well, this craft passed by.
Thank you. We're run out of time. We're going to go to more roll-in with Tom King footage from more of the Phoenix Lights.
Jason, I got it on tape.